Before the questions, I just want to say that this was really an inspirational talk, I think, from everyone. It's just that the university is in the middle of its exam mode and other things like that, so we couldn't get. But luckily, with Professor Alam, we've recorded all this and we will play it out as well as be available more broadly. But for our audience over here, any questions, any observations, you're most welcome.
Can I ask some questions?
Wow. Yes.
Sorry. Might be easy if I'm over here. I actually have a lot of questions for you. I think I might have been dazing and paying attention to time, and I think I missed a little bit. So would you mind maybe just explaining to me, so the platform you're going to create is on the internet, correct?
Yes.
And the people that you're aiming for, the refugees you're aiming for, are in camps?
Some of them are in camps and some of them are internationally displaced.
Internationally displaced in camps, or they've been settled in those countries, or because internationally displaced could mean all manner of things. They could be sat in Calais in a refugee camp, or they could be settled with a host family, or they could have a job. What level
all of them actually.
Okay, but if the only way that they can access this is having not only access to the internet, but probably, is it also going to be in English, or is it going to be in Arabic, or both?
It's going to be in English, most likely.
Okay, so they have to, first of all, have access to the internet. They have to have access to regular technology, and they have to already be able to speak English.
Yes.
So do you not think that that's only going to target those refugees that probably already would have had those opportunities within those countries? Because when we think of refugees, we think about desperation and poverty and hunger, which we do, because that's what we see. But we see those people who won't have access to the internet, who don't speak English. So my question is, how do you intend to target those people rather than just the refugees that have already found their way to the top?
So do you mean the refugees that are currently in camps?
Or wherever, because even if you've been settled internationally, say in England, you could be in a very low budget council estate with no access to the internet, no access to technology, go your entire life without speaking English, and then you can't educate yourself. That's how unfortunately these people become isolated, and that's how they lose hope, and that's how they lose opportunities. So how do you intend to reach out to those sectors of the refugee population rather than the ones who have already arguably been given those opportunities?
So to answer your question, first of all, the way that we're going to target the youth that are in camps, the Big Heart Foundation, the foundation that I have just mentioned that will be adopting and sponsoring the project, they have their own centers in refugees camps, so we can use them without paying any amount of money. And on those camps, on those centers, they have internet access, they have computers, they have specialist advisors as well. So they said they'll be more than glad to help have the platform access for them to enter and find the opportunities that are available, and they will also evaluate their skills if they will be able to study or not. And also to answer your question, it is you're very right. Like many of them, the least fortunate, probably they cannot speak English and they cannot have access to internet and other things. But this kind of project is draft one, and it's only a pilot project. So the target number that we have, as you notice, is only very small. It's only 100. So we will be targeting some of them who are in refugee camps, in the camps itself, and some of them who are internationally displaced. And sometimes I hear many people say that even the ones who are doing very well off with their lives, actually they're not. Because I made a lot of friends of them. And one of the people is working with me on the team. He's a refugee himself. He found his way through France, and he's living there and studying, but he doesn't even have a normal life. He has to work very hard for his education and school, and I think everybody does. But for me, I think it should be an open opportunity for everyone. There is no limitation. And for the ones as you've mentioned, they cannot speak English, it is the time for them to get educated, because if you do not speak English, you'll not be able to go anywhere in the world. Like even in Arab countries, you have to speak English. You have to get educated, and even for them, this might be an opportunity, or maybe we can create a program to teach them English from the first place, or we can have a joint program for those who lack the skills of speaking foreign languages. We can create something for them, and it depends. The moment that we reach them, we can know their needs more, and we can know how to work with it to develop them.
Okay. Professor?
A couple of things from, are you going to, okay.
Sorry?
In fact, what you have said is very touchy. Okay, but in Sudan, we have a very different experience with the Syrian refugees. Okay, we have a flood of refugees from Syria, In Sudan, we accepted them. We opened for them the schools. People gave them accommodation. People employ them in their shops, in their factories, in everywhere. They are now part of the community. We need something like this everywhere. They are no longer looked at as
Foreigners,
refugees.
yeah.
They enough what they have suffered. When they reach the country there, they just
Feel home.
go wherever they like, every place. Next day to take the students to the nearest school, to go to the nearest hospital, to go to the nearest factory for work. This is what is happening there. And because of this now, every day we have thousands of Syrians from Syria going to Sudan. We are proud of this. But this should be real brotherhood. This should be
Yes.
real Islam behavior. This should be how the community, the world, it is shame on the world what has happened what is happening for the refugees. It is not shame, it is shame on the whole world. We have not just enough to say we want donations, we want people to give us. No, people should give everything that is possible. Okay, and when you give part of what you have, I think this is too much. Another point regarding the education you are mentioning, I believe that in your program you should go for vocational training. Not necessarily all those refugees to have this classical education. No, let them go for vocational training, for mechanics, for plumbing, for carpentry, for whatever. This is more useful. This is more useful for them and because also they may fill in some gap in the communities with their capabilities. Syrians are very good in working in restaurants, in food industry, in beverages, in agriculture. They're very good in this, and I think you have to focus on this area.
For sure, we'll add it. Thank you very much.
Professor Salim, you had
Yeah,
a
there's
comment?
a couple of comments here. Education and knowledge is a problem, as they mentioned. Some people ask you about the role of the media in all the women equality. One here, Ahlam said, I think, she said women, the WhatsApp keep coming. I can't stop it. What it says here, women will change the nature of power rather than power changing the nature of women. So I was thinking, what I think what she's trying to say in the other is that it's not we try to change the nature of women to be equal, but women should change the power of women should change the nature of the system in a different way. So to what extent, I don't know, you agree or yes?
Yep. I think that's a very fundamental point. This is not about somehow getting women to play a role within the system or even empowering women. I think this point was made by several speakers. This is about empowering communities. We're talking about women as leaders, not only playing a role in their own empowerment, but more broadly in changing society. So, and this relates very much to the point that you've been making, that in order for us to sort of have fresh, innovative approaches, we know that young female leaders are making the change much more effective, much more sustainable than the others. Because apart from the hope, apart from the positive messages, I found there were a lot of very fresh ideas. And that photograph of which you're working with other young female leaders in trying to bring about new solutions, very different from the way we think in terms of, regular fit. And another very positive thing, and thank you, Professor, for talking to us about what Sudan is doing. We are going to look at what are lessons learned. What are the best practices that are? University of East London is probably one of the leading universities when it comes to refugee studies. We have the Refugee Council archive over here. Our refugee studies program is more than 20 years old. We have 10 or 15 different modules taught right across the university. And most importantly, we were the first to step up and say that we will offer scholarship for Syrian students. I think we offer 20 scholarship, but there are a whole lot of other support systems. So on one hand, it is about widening access, opening opportunities and others. The second way, I think, Professor Alam, your question, or rather the point that came from the floor was that it's not going to be business as usual. We're all going to benefit from the need to think outside the box, to think creatively, and to think ahead of the curve, so to speak.
Another question, what is the role of the media in women or equality in terms of women in the Arab countries? Media. We should have a speaker on media, but she's been called for emergency. So there's a couple of questions about the role of media.
Something about the role of the media. If we are given the opportunity, we are not media people, we are professional, but media is now used actually to create the discourse around the globe, for war, for peace, for justice, injustice, for whatever reason. I think now, and the role of the media has also been boosted by the social media evolution, where the whole world could know about something in a few seconds. It's real time. Everyone could be part of everything, provided that, of course, they have access and they're able to take part of that. But actually, this free flow of information and enhanced role for the media has its own problems, because sometimes wrong information circulated, wrong discourse is created and given and publicity. I think what the best way media platforms, virtual or real, could be used is and this is not a role for specialists. Discourse does not need to be created by specialists. Discourse needs to be created by stakeholders. And the specialist could shape it, could frame it, just to make it sound nice and better, glossy, professional. But they do not necessarily need to create it, because they may not be the stakeholders. So the stakeholder need to sit down, create their discourse. That discourse has to go through the kitchen of the professional framework. The professional media experts could frame it, and then that could be adopted as a discourse. Media has played a role in actually highlighting the plight of the Syrian refugees, more than, for example, other countries, when they had bigger number of internally displaced, bigger number of victims, longer period of civil wars and lack of political stability or stability altogether. Media plays, and we are now living, we are actually real time as we speak. We have this question through the media mediums, which is exercising us now. This question is exercising our power. It came through the media platforms. That has to be very productively, very usefully utilized to get the outcome. But again, it is about creating the right discourse. And from that discourse need to come the right agenda. Because through the discourse, you create the awareness and you create the agenda. You can aspire to have a proper level of implementation. And by the way, contribution to implementation could be spontaneous. I do not have to be part of this discussion to contribute it. I can just hear about it and give my opinion. But if that is well constructed, well communicated to the right audience, so that the role of the media is important, but can also be destructive, because media could be used to distract and actually a lot of good projects, to create the counter narrative, to create a wrong narrative altogether. But the role of the media cannot be and has never been more important. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think media can help you, especially with refugees, to connect the people. Since refugees are outside of their home, media can help make them feel together, help them feel together, and that can be very important for refugees especially.
I have a question for Professor Warsama. Thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned something about that in corporate governance, there is a quota for women in leadership positions. So I wanted to ask, where is this,
Yes.
where in the world is this rule
very good.
applied?
Very good.
And is it just about numbers and representation in boards of directors, or does it also address equal pay? Because I know here in the UK there is a significant pay
Very
gap
good.
between men
Very
and
good.
women, even when
Very
they're
good.
doing the same job.
Very good. In corporate governance now, there are guidelines to empower women. And in each company, according to its policy, to have a quota for women in the board of directors, and to have a quota of women in the executive directorship.
Where in the world, in which
It is the role of this, or where is it
No, I mean,
mentioned?
where is this applied? In which countries, this quota system?
In the Article of Association of the company,
Okay.
which is the law of the company, the internal rule of the company. You put this from the board of directors to initiate this, and to say that by first we have to have a directive, general directive in the company law, which is the national law for all countries. There, for example, specifically, if I may recall, Norway, Switzerland, America, there is very specific reference in the common law that gives a quota in the board of directors. So we have to have this in our also company law to follow suit, to have this. Then when it comes to the application of this, for example, in Bahrain, in the banking sector, there is a directive from the Central Bank of Bahrain to banks to have at least one member in the board from women. And in the executive directives, every bank that gives more role for women in the executive side, this will have more credit in the evaluation of the bank by the central bank, the rating of the bank. So this is here wherein such things comes through the company law and the corporate governance, and it may vary from company to company. However, you have to have a general reference, and then each company to go for that.
Yeah, can I intervene here? I think there are two issues here: the equal pay and the representation in high positions and board of directors. The representation in high positions and board of directors could be protected by law. The law could stipulate for the minimum threshold that companies need to meet in terms of the number of women and in their high position. The mess with the equal pay issue has been created by the corporate market, not by the legislative bodies. Banks and bodies in this country, BBC was actually quoted to this recently.
This is in the company law. But when it comes to corporate governance, because corporate governance is not having that obligatory 100% side, okay? Because even here in England, according to the corporate governance rules, it is applied or asked for extension or ask for mitigation, something like this.
Yes, the corporate governance could actually ensure that we have a specific number of women in the board, could ensure that the pay attributed for the role is equal. But what cannot be ensured is the fact banks, for example, give bonuses linked to performance, linked to meeting targets. This is where the problem happens. You can have two people, a man and a woman, having the same salary, but when it comes to the actual pay at the end of the financial year, you can find a man having 3 times the salary, or the money, not the salary, the money that his female colleague is having, because it is linked to bonuses, to performance, to commissions, to allowances, to the targets. And that is why the market has to do more. The regulatory framework is doing well. I think it's catching up. with the requirements and having specific numbers for women. But the corporate market has to do much, much better. And this is actually even big organizations here talking about this.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this conversation has actually been very, very helpful. We need different kind of strategies for women at different stages, at different levels. So particularly we need, of course, very strong female leadership. And when you talk about equal opportunities, equal pay, that's tremendously important. We need leaders in the industry who are women who are able to, without the gender bias, function, produce, and so on. But on the other hand, we also need to think about many of the women who haven't reached that level, who need the kind of equal opportunity and access to get there. So for example, when products are made, when opportunities are made, jobs are created, are they really in man's world, or are they really gender equal? And again, this comes back to some of our perception and the discourse that we've talked about, which is about women's agency, which is about recognizing women's voices, experience, needs, and priorities. And I think it goes back to the point that you made. Even as far as refugees are concerned, are they seen as actors or passive, victims? And therefore, what your project does, which gives them a voice, which gives them opportunities, is very, very important, which is part of a much more difficult and complex process of ensuring that equality for women, but also for different diverse groups of people. Absolutely.
But isn't there a danger there, sorry to interject,
No,
I completely agree, you can't just treat women or refugees as this homogenous mass. The agency is essential, but if you grant too much agency, if you say, well, why aren't you doing more to pull yourselves out of this? Then surely we end up just rewarding those women who can work through the male-dominated system. Like someone said via WhatsApp earlier, we're just giving women power, the few that can do it, and rewarding them by saying, well done, you use your agency, rather than changing the nature of power. Because like Naji said earlier, we can equalise the salaries, but the fact that men get rewarded more for bonuses, that's because men respond better to men in the corporate world, and there's no way of adjusting that with a purely regulatory framework, and there's no way of adjusting that by just giving women more agency. We put more female leaders in. How many do we have to put in before they change the entire system? A lot, probably.
Yep.
So saying that refugees have the agency and women have the agency is of course essential, but we also have to give some serious consideration of the structure that prevents them. Otherwise, like you said, we end up concentrating on the women who are able to get to the top and are able to become leaders. And then what about the women that can't?
No, absolutely right. I think we are not trying to just increase the number of women because they're women, even though, of course, women's empowerment is intrinsically important. But the whole idea is that this is supposed to contribute to change, reform, or transformation that takes place. And I think you hit the nail on the head in saying, have we actually made that connection? Are these sort of ad hoc, moves that we say by looking at, pay gap or representation without actually understanding that we are addressing the structural causes that exist over there, the dynamics of how business is done? And yes, it doesn't mean that we change the rules simply to favor the other group over men, but to create an even playing field which can work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yep. Rula?
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very informative. It's very interesting to hear this debate, and I've been having this debate on the last 2 days, actually. It's the quota. Let me come back to that area. The quota idea has been around since the 90s. When I was working for Shell, that was introduced because they had this problem of the lack of female leaders. But it doesn't work. Women find it patronizing, first of all, that they need a quota for them to reach the senior management level. Otherwise, they won't be able to reach it, as if they are seen weak to be able to compete on the merit element. And the main problem, I believe, as Siraj mentioned earlier, is from the start, opening the opportunities from the early recruitment element, where we recruit male and female at equal base to be trained and supported until they reach the level of competition on a senior level. It's all about giving the opportunity rather than empowering them, because I believe women do have the power already. They empower themselves, but allowing them to express that and use it by giving the opportunities that might be blocked because of society, whether hinders within the background of development and education during their life, like their families, their communities, or by a male-dominated management team that respond better to men, as you mentioned earlier. So it is a huge change that requires long-term development, but it is opening opportunity at an early stage and giving voice. It's the whole idea of giving voice, and this is where I come back to the brilliant project that you are doing, the Hub for Opportunity. Maybe if you try to get more ideas from the refugees themselves and see what sort of educational opportunities they are aiming for, if you can reach out to them and see where they need to be, then you might come up with the great ideas of what sort of opportunities needed for them and how to communicate it to them. I worry sometimes when we say everyone should speak English, and then we forget that not the whole world speaks English, and all languages have their role in the development of a human being. So maybe we need to widen the scope a little bit more and see from the voices. I work in marketing, and we always say start from the customer. From the clients, so find out their voices, and based on that try to work with the problems that they are facing.
Thank you very much. I mean, just to add one thing to what you said, in the team that I'm currently working in, we have one Syrian refugee, and I wouldn't call him a refugee. He's very talented. He's the best among us all. And he studied in France, and he lived in France, and he's been giving us amazing ideas. And he's also the one who suggested we have the joint program with universities, short term. And I hope that it will have a big impact on them. And as you mentioned, it's only just an idea, and I hope that will have a positive impact on them. And another part of the English language, I do believe that Syrian in general are very talented, they're very smart, and speaking more than one language will not hinder their abilities. It's very essential for us to be fluent in Arabic since it's our mother tongue and Lughat al-Quran, but also that does not hide the fact that we should also be fluent in other foreign languages to help us live in life and reach advanced stages.
Actually, my take on this to comment on that, on the question of whether empowerment or opportunity that women require, I think it is both, depending on the location and where you're looking at. When you look at the emerging countries like Africa, you understand that women actually need empowerment first. Because when you look at it, there are two issues. One is of governance and the other one is of culture that is holding women back. The opportunities, recruitment and employment is open for men and women both. But because women, they don't have the skills actually to fit into the requirements of the job, you find them being actually lagging behind. They don't have the education. When you go back to Africa again, still you find that in many communities, women are disallowed by culture to pursue higher education. Yeah, by culture. They are not allowed to go beyond the secondary school. And two, when you look at the governance, even the basic universal education that's supposed to be given free to each and every citizen is not there. The legal framework is there. Constitutions contains that. It is enshrined in the constitution that the government should give the basic education, but it's not there, the basic education. And when you ask the lawyers, as you said, Professor Abdul Qadir mentioned, the legal framework is not justiciable in Africa, meaning that you can't sue the government, you can't take the government tax to implement that. Unlike in these developed countries, where you see the women are well educated as men, they're looking for opportunities, not empowerment as such. And I said the culture, that comes to actually what Professor Abdul Qadir mentioned clearly, that it is not the religion as much is the issue, but the culture that's holding the women back, especially when it comes to issues of opportunities, when it comes to issues of participation. The international legal framework that's created by the Security Council resolution, I think 1325 of 2000, it calls for actually participation of women in matters of peace, making in matters of prevention of conflict, in matters of resolution, in matters of development. And when you look at the religion framework, as the professor has mentioned, Islam has actually encouraged women to participate in that. We understand that from history, women in important matters like securing the release of prisoners of war played a role. For example, in Khaybar, Professor, I stand to correct me, in the Battle of Khaybar, a woman called Safiya, she secured the release of hundreds of prisoners. And this is participation in the peace process, it is participation in peace negotiation. And we understand that at once, the Prophet issued an order, and people delayed to implement his order, which was understood to be capable of leading to disaster. But men didn't see it actually. It was a woman who first actually perceived that and called for the implementation. And it happened. So therefore, it is the culture and not the religion that prevents women actually interfering into these things. And women in Africa, imagine state, they need empowerment more than actually the opportunities. The opportunities are there, but empowerment. And again, the legal framework is there, but implementation is the problem. My question now is to Professor. What measures, what approach can we take actually to get these skills and empowerment actually made available to the people in Africa and other states where culture and governance is holding them back?
Thank you, Bakari. We'll move on this discussion to the lunch that we have to break for. We've just run out of time. But before we finish, there's one very powerful woman in the room. In fact, there are many powerful women who haven't spoken. But could I just... Yeah, sure, Professor.
1 minute.
Yeah.
1 minute. In Africa and in all poor countries, we have to first have the social structure and awareness of the people about so many things, including the status of women. Okay? Unfortunately, in some of such countries, poor countries or uneducated, rate of uneducation is very high, people don't give the woman it is right position. Okay, if we refer to Islam, for example, the status of women there is very clear. I have quoted, I have mentioned this. Okay, now a very important thing in law, by putting the law, we need to make a change. We need to make a change by putting a law, okay? And this needs a gradual change. However, going for putting teeth for the empowerment of women, you have to have the law. You have to have quota. You have to have certain directives for the people. Okay, this does not mean that this is to minimize the status of the woman or at the cost of the other sex. No, it is not. We want to stabilize. We want to stabilize certain position. We believe that women are not having their proper place. Therefore, we want to kick them up. Maybe this is not enough, but it is a start to go forward. And change of the society, change of the mind needs generations and generations and generations. But this is just a start.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. Before we close, I'd like to just hear from Khadija, who's been in the front line of things. Would you like to say a few words? Because I knew you had a comment to make.
Thank you very much. Everything is very insightful and informative. I come from Somalia, where for the last 27 years we didn't have any government, any functioning government. The most important thing I will target is psychosocial impact of not having legislation. As a woman, how can you have any sort of political participation if you don't have any law supporting what you want? For example, in Somalia, we have well-educated women, especially from the North Path. We have the tools, we have the voice, but there is not legislation or laws which will defend us in case we need help. So as he said, law is very important, but how can we participate to make sure we reinforce this law? That is a very, very important point. It's not much about leadership, it's not much about participation, it's about implementing on an international arena and on a national arena the laws that respect and helps women.
I'm just hoping that we can carry on this discussion in room 410 where lunch is being served. Over to you, Jessica. I mean, I've somehow taken over a bit of your role as a moderator, but
okay.
Over to you.
Yeah, sorry to cut things short. We're actually, there's another class coming in here soon. We unceremoniously took this from somebody else. But lunch should be a great time to continue this in a much less formal way.
I need your opinion.
So thank you very much for this morning's session and for all of your great comments. We've still got another brilliant speaker to come on next, and I think we'll also try and find some more time for this sort of group discussion as we go forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.